Hello guys, welcome to Boring History Channel. Tonight, imagine this. You've been walking for days, the sun has vanished, and the only place left is a dimly lit medieval inn. It looks safe from the outside, but the moment you step in, something feels wrong. The air is thick, the strangers don't trust you, and sleep might be the most dangerous thing you can do. What really happened inside these inns after dark? And why did so many people fear the night more than the road itself? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you might be glad you never lived in that time. So dim the lights, relax, and let your mind drift into the shadows of history. And before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy the stories, and do comment from where you're watching this video. The idea of a medieval inn often feels comforting at first glance, like a warm refuge glowing in the darkness after a long journey. A place where tired travellers gather around a fire, drink ale, and rest safely until morning. But the reality was far harsher, far more dangerous, and far less forgiving than anything we imagine today. If you were to step into a medieval inn for a single night, you would quickly realize that survival itself was not guaranteed. Not because of one obvious threat, but because of a relentless combination of discomfort, disease, suspicion, and ever-present danger that quietly worked against you from the moment you entered. The first thing that would strike you is the smell. A heavy, suffocating mixture of sweat, damp wood, animal waste, stale ale, and unwashed bodies that clung to the air and seeped into your clothes, making it difficult to breathe comfortably. Hygiene, as we understand it today, simply did not exist in such spaces. Travellers arrived after days or weeks on the road without bathing, often covered in dirt, lice, and fleas, and they brought all of that with them into the inn. Bedding was rarely cleaned, if at all, and was often shared among multiple guests, meaning that when you lay down to rest, you were not alone. Fleas would bite relentlessly through the night. Lice would crawl through your hair and clothes, and bedbugs would emerge from cracks in the wooden frames, turning what should have been rest into a slow, unbearable torment. Sleep, if it came at all, would be shallow and constantly interrupted, leaving you exhausted rather than refreshed. And exhaustion in such an environment was dangerous because it dulled your awareness, making you vulnerable to everything else that lurked within the inn food and drink, which should have provided comfort, often became another source of risk. Meals were simple and frequently prepared in unsanitary conditions, with little understanding of contamination. Meat might be spoiled, masked with heavy spices to hide the taste, and water was rarely safe to drink, often contaminated with bacteria and waste. Ale was the safer option, but even that could be weak, sour, or poorly stored. Consuming such food could leave you ill, sometimes violently so, with no access to proper medical care. A sudden fever, stomach sickness, or infection could escalate quickly. And in a time before modern medicine, even minor ailments could become life. Threatening, the inn offered no safety net for such situations. If you became too weak, you were simply another burden, and not one that others were eager to carry. Then there were the people. Medieval inns were not peaceful gathering places filled with friendly strangers sharing stories by the fire. They were crossroads of all kinds of travellers, merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, labourers, and sometimes criminals. Trust was a luxury few could afford. Theft was common, and your belongings were always at risk, especially if you let your guard down. A purse left unattended even for a moment could disappear. More dangerously, some individuals might see you not just as a target for theft, but as an opportunity. Violence was not uncommon, especially in overcrowded inns, where tensions ran high and disputes could escalate quickly. A simple misunderstanding or a drunken argument could turn into a fight, and without any form of organized security, you would be left to defend yourself or hope to stay unnoticed. Even the innkeeper, who you might expect to provide protection, was not always trustworthy. Some were known to collaborate with thieves, sharing information about wealthy guests, or even assisting in crimes for a share of the reward. The structure of the inn itself offered little comfort or safety. Rooms, if they existed at all, were often shared among multiple strangers, sometimes with no partitions, just a common sleeping area where bodies lay side by side. Privacy was non-existent. Your possessions remained within arm's reach of others, and your personal safety depended entirely on your ability to remain alert even while resting. Doors, if present, were simple and easy to force open, and windows offered little more than a barrier against the wind. Fire, a constant presence for warmth and cooking, posed another serious threat. Wooden buildings, open flames, and crowded conditions created the perfect environment for accidental fires, which could spread rapidly and leave little chance for escape, especially at night. Beyond the physical dangers, there was also the psychological strain. The constant noise of coughing, snoring, murmuring voices, creaking wood, and restless movement filled the space, making true rest nearly impossible. The awareness that you were surrounded by strangers, any one of whom might pose a threat, created a persistent sense of unease. You could not fully relax, not even for a moment. Every sound might signal danger. Every shadow might conceal someone watching, waiting. The darkness of night only intensified these fears, as the flickering light of candles and hearth fires cast moving shadows that played tricks on the mind. In such an environment, your instincts would remain on edge, your mind unable to settle, your body caught between exhaustion and alertness. Disease was perhaps the most silent and deadly threat of all. Medieval inns, with their crowded conditions and lack of sanitation, were ideal breeding grounds for illness. Infectious diseases could spread quickly among guests, carried by fleas, contaminated food, or simple close contact. You might arrive healthy and leave with a sickness that would follow you long after the journey ended. In a time when outbreaks of plague and other deadly illnesses were not uncommon, every crowded space carried an invisible risk, one that could not be seen or easily avoided. The inn, rather than being a place of recovery, could become the very place where your health began to fail. Even if you managed to avoid illness, theft, violence, and fire, the simple challenge of enduring the night would test you. The cold could seep through poorly insulated walls, especially in winter, making it difficult to stay warm despite the presence of a fire. Insects would continue their relentless assault, and the lack of comfort would make every passing hour feel longer than the last. Morning, when it finally arrived, would not bring relief so much as a sense of survival, the realization that you had endured something rather than rested through it. In the end, surviving a night in a medieval inn was not about comfort or relaxation, but about endurance, vigilance, and a bit of luck. It required you to navigate a world where basic necessities were uncertain, where safety was never guaranteed, and where every aspect of the environment worked against your well-being. The romantic image of the cozy inn fades quickly when faced with the reality of what such places truly were: unpredictable, uncomfortable, and often dangerous. And as you imagine yourself lying there in the dim light, surrounded by strangers, plagued by insects, breathing in the heavy air, listening to the restless sounds of the night, you begin to understand that survival was not just about making it to the inn, but about making it through the night within its walls. What made the experience even more unforgiving was the complete absence of any sense of personal control. In a medieval inn, you could not choose your room, your bed, your neighbours, or even the time you would be allowed to rest. If the inn was crowded, and it often was, you might be forced to share not just a room, but the very bed itself with strangers whose intentions, health, and habits were entirely unknown to you. Imagine lying in the dark beside someone who smells of sweat and travel, whose breathing is heavy, whose movements are unpredictable, and knowing that you have no safe alternative. You could not simply leave either, because outside the inn, the dangers of the road at night were often worse. Bandits, wild animals, and the complete absence of light made wandering into the darkness a risk few could afford. So you stayed, trapped in a place that was meant to protect you, yet offered so little real safety. The concept of time itself seemed to stretch and distort in such conditions. Without proper lighting, the night was longer and heavier, broken only by the weak glow of candles or the dying embers of a fire. These sources of light were not constant. Candles were expensive and often used sparingly, meaning that large parts of the inn would fall into near total darkness. In that darkness, even the smallest disturbances felt magnified. A creak of wood could sound like a footstep. A shifting shadow could feel like someone watching you. The human mind, deprived of rest and surrounded by uncertainty, begins to imagine threats even where there may be none. This constant tension eroded your ability to think clearly, to remain calm, to feel secure. You were not just physically uncomfortable, you were mentally exhausted, worn down by the effort of staying alert in an environment that never truly felt safe. Another often overlooked danger was the presence of animals within or around the inn. Horses were typically stabled nearby, sometimes even within the same structure, and with them came flies, fleas, and the strong smell of manure. Rats were a common sight, drawn by food scraps and the warmth of the building. They would scurry along the floors and walls, sometimes even venturing close to sleeping guests. These were not harmless creatures. They carried diseases and could contaminate whatever little food you had. The idea of waking up in the middle of the night to sound of scratching, only to realize that rats were moving near you, or even over your belongings, adds another layer of discomfort and fear that would make restful sleep nearly impossible. Then there was the issue of social hierarchy and power. Even the act of trying to relax would feel strangely unnatural, as if your body refused to accept that this was a place meant for rest. Your instincts would keep reminding you that something was off, that this environment was not safe enough to let your guard down. You might try to close your eyes, to force yourself into sleep, but your senses would remain alert, picking up every shift in movement, every murmur of conversation, every sudden burst of laughter, or argument from somewhere in the room. It is a different kind of exhaustion, one where your body is tired, but your mind refuses to surrender, leaving you stuck in a restless state that drains you even more than physical effort ever could. As the night deepens, the behavior of people around you begins to change. Alcohol flows more freely, and whatever sense of restraint existed earlier in the evening starts to fade. Voices grow louder, tempers shorter, and the thin layer of civility that held things together begins to crack. A disagreement over space, food, or money can quickly escalate into shouting and sometimes into violence. You would witness arguments that feel sudden and unpredictable, fueled by drink and frustration, and you would realize how quickly you could become involved, even if you tried to stay out of it. In such close quarters, there is no real distance from conflict. You are always just a few steps away from it. The lack of proper lighting only makes these moments more unsettling. Faces are half, hidden in shadow, expressions difficult to read, intentions unclear. You cannot easily tell who is calm and who is dangerous, who is simply tired and who might be watching you with interest. This uncertainty forces you to remain cautious, to constantly evaluate the people around you without ever feeling confident in your judgments. Trust becomes nearly impossible, and without trust, every interaction carries a hint of tension. Your belongings, no matter how insignificant they might seem, become a constant concern. You might find yourself checking them repeatedly, adjusting their position, keeping them as close to you as possible. Even then, there is no guarantee of safety. Skilled thieves could move quietly through the room, taking advantage of the darkness and the exhaustion of others. You might wake suddenly, unsure of what disturbed you, only to realize that something is missing, and in that moment there would be little you could do. There were no authorities to call, no systems in place to recover what was lost. What was taken was gone, and the loss could affect not just your journey, but your ability to survive the days ahead. The physical discomfort continues to build as the hours pass. Your body, pressed against hard surfaces or cramped into limited space, begins to ache. There is no comfortable position, no way to fully stretch or settle. The air grows heavier as more people breathe within the confined space, and the warmth from bodies and fire turns into an oppressive heat that makes it difficult to stay comfortable. Then, as the fire dies down, the warmth fades quickly, replaced by a chill that seeps into your bones. This constant shift between too hot and too cold prevents your body from finding any sense of balance. Hunger and thirst may also linger, especially if the food provided earlier was insufficient or unappealing. You might hesitate to eat more, unsure of its safety, yet your body still demands energy water. If available, might not feel trustworthy, and so you remain in a state of mild dehydration, adding to your discomfort. These small physical stresses accumulate, each one manageable on its own, but together creating a level of strain that wears you down over time. There is also the quiet fear of the unknown, the sense that something could happen at any moment and that you would not be prepared for it. This is not a fear tied to a specific threat, but rather a general awareness that you are in an environment where control is limited and unpredictability is constant. It is the kind of fear that keeps you from fully relaxing, that lingers in the background of your thoughts, influencing how you move, how you speak, how you even breathe. At some point in the night, you might hear someone coughing persistently, a deep, unsettling sound that echoes through the room. It is a reminder of illness, of how easily it spreads in such close quarters. You might instinctively turn away, try to create distance, but there is only so much space to begin with. The realization that you are sharing this environment with people whose health you know nothing about adds another layer of unease. You begin to think not just about surviving the night, but about what you might carry with you afterward. The passage of time becomes difficult to track. Without clocks or clear markers, you rely on the gradual change in darkness, the subtle shift in the sounds around you. Conversations fade, replaced by the uneven rhythm of sleep, punctuated by occasional disturbances. You might find yourself drifting in and out of a light, uneasy rest, never fully asleep, never fully awake. Each time you close your eyes, it feels like only moments pass before something pulls you back to awareness. And yet, despite everything, there is a strange resilience that begins to form within you. You adapt, even if only slightly, to the conditions around you. You learn to ignore certain sounds, to tolerate certain discomforts, to remain still and quiet when necessary. It is not comfort, but it is survival. You begin to understand how people of that time endured such environments, not because they were easier, but because they had no other choice. When the first hints of morning finally arrive, they bring with them a sense of release that is almost overwhelming. The light, however faint, pushes back the shadows that made the night feel so uncertain. People begin to stir, to gather their belongings, to prepare to leave. The tension that filled the space during the night starts to ease, replaced by the simple shared goal of moving on. You might step outside and take a deep breath of fresh air, realizing just how heavy and oppressive the atmosphere inside had been. But even as you leave, the experience stays with you. The memory of the noise, the smell, the discomfort, the constant awareness of danger, it all lingers. You understand now that surviving a night in a medieval inn was not a passive experience. It demanded awareness, endurance, and a willingness to face conditions that challenged every expectation of safety and comfort. It was a test, one that did not announce itself, but unfolded slowly over the course of the night, revealing just how fragile your sense of security could be when stripped of the protections you are used to. And perhaps that is the most striking realization of all, that what we consider basic necessities today, cleanliness, privacy, security, were once luxuries, and that without them, even something as simple as spending a night under a roof could become an ordeal. In that world, survival was never guaranteed by the walls around you. It depended on your ability to endure everything those walls contained. As the night drags closer to its deepest hours, there comes a point where your body begins to feel almost detached from itself, caught between fatigue and discomfort in a way that makes it difficult to even think clearly. Your muscles ache from remaining tense for so long. Your eyes burn from the lack of proper rest, and your thoughts start to blur together. In a modern setting, this kind of exhaustion would simply lead to sleep. But here, sleep is never fully safe. Every instinct tells you to remain aware, to not surrender completely, because doing so might expose you to risks you cannot predict or control. It is a strange and draining state, where rest becomes something you fear almost as much as you need. The air inside the inn grows thicker as the hours pass, filled with the combined breath of dozens of people, the smoke from the fire that never fully escapes, and the lingering odors that have settled into the very structure of the building. Each breath feels heavier than the last, and you might find yourself turning your face slightly, searching for even a small pocket of fresher air. But there is no real escape from it. The windows, if they exist, are small and often closed to keep out the cold or to prevent unwanted entry. Ventilation is minimal, and so the atmosphere becomes almost suffocating, adding to the sense of confinement that defines the entire experience. At some point, you begin to notice how vulnerable you truly are in such a place. There are no locks you can rely on, no secure barriers between you and the outside world, or even the people within the inn itself. Your safety depends entirely on chance, on the hope that nothing goes wrong, that no one chooses to target you, that no unexpected event disrupts the fragile balance of the night. It is a realization that strips away any illusion of control, leaving you with a quiet, persistent awareness that you are at the mercy of your surroundings. The sounds of the night continue to shift in subtle ways. Someone nearby might be talking in their sleep, their words incoherent but unsettling. Another person might suddenly wake and move around, the sound of their footsteps echoing louder than it should in the dim, quiet space. A door creaks open somewhere, letting in a brief gust of colder air before closing again. Each of these moments feels significant, even if it is not, because your mind is searching constantly for signs of danger, trying to make sense of an environment that offers very little clarity. You may also begin to feel a growing sense of isolation, even though you are surrounded by people. There is no real connection, no shared understanding or comfort. Everyone is focused on their own survival, their own belongings, their own need to get through the night. As the final stretch of night settles in, there is a peculiar heaviness that takes over, a feeling that time itself has slowed to a crawl, as though the darkness is reluctant to release its grip. By now your body is no longer just tired. It is strained, almost aching from the effort of enduring a place that never allowed true rest. Even the smallest movements feel deliberate, as if conserving energy has become instinctive. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, only to find that nothing truly relieves the discomfort. The surface beneath you remains unforgiving. The air remains thick, and the sounds around you continue to intrude upon what little peace you try to create for yourself. Your senses, dulled by exhaustion yet sharpened by necessity, begin to pick up on details you might have ignored earlier. The uneven rhythm of breathing around you tells its own quiet story, some deep and steady, others strained or irregular, hinting at illness or unease. The occasional clink of metal, perhaps from a traveller adjusting their belongings, echoes more loudly than it should, reminding you again of how close everyone is to one another, how little separation exists in this shared space. Even the faint crackle of dying embers in the hearth feels significant, a subtle reminder that the one source of warmth and light is slowly fading, leaving the room colder and darker with each passing moment. There is also a growing awareness of your own vulnerability, not just physically, but mentally. Prolonged discomfort has a way of eroding patience, of making small irritations feel larger than they are. You might find your thoughts becoming shorter, more focused on immediate needs, less capable of wandering or reflecting. It is a survival mindset, one that narrows your attention to the essentials, but at the cost of any sense of calm or clarity. In such a state, even a minor disturbance can feel overwhelming, and you begin to understand how easily tension could escalate in a place like this. At times, the silence between sounds becomes just as unsettling as the noise itself. There are moments when the room seems almost still, when the usual murmurs and movements pause, and in that stillness, your mind becomes even more active. You listen more closely, trying to detect anything out of place, any sign that something might be wrong. It is in these moments that imagination can take hold, filling the gaps with possibilities that may not be real, but feel real enough to keep you from relaxing. The darkness, combined with the quiet, creates a space where uncertainty thrives. Your awareness of the passage of time becomes almost entirely internal. Without clear markers, you begin to measure the night by your own endurance, by how long you can maintain your composure, how long you can tolerate the discomfort. Each moment that passes without incident feels like a small victory. Yet the overall experience remains draining. You are not progressing toward comfort, only toward the eventual end of the night, and that end feels distant, almost unreachable at times. There is also the lingering thought that others around you are experiencing the same thing, yet in their own ways. Some may be more accustomed to it, their bodies and minds adapted to such conditions, allowing them to sleep more easily despite everything. Others, like you, may be struggling, shifting restlessly, unable to find any true relief. This shared but unspoken struggle creates a strange sense of connection, one that does not rely on words or interaction, but on the simple fact that everyone present is enduring the same environment. As the darkness begins, almost imperceptibly, to lighten, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It is not immediate, nor is it dramatic, but it is enough to be noticed. The edges of objects become slightly clearer, the shadows less absolute. With this change comes a small but meaningful sense of reassurance. The unknown begins to recede, replaced by something more familiar, more manageable. Your mind, which has been on constant alert, starts to ease, if only slightly. The sounds of waking begin slowly. A stir here, a cough there, the rustle of movement as people begin to gather themselves. These are not loud or sudden, but they carry a different tone than the sounds of the night. They signal transition, the shift from endurance to continuation. The night, with all its discomforts and uncertainties, is coming to an end, and with it, the need to remain in that heightened state of awareness. When you finally rise, your body feels heavy, as though it has carried more than just its own weight through the night. There is stiffness in your limbs, a lingering fatigue that does not disappear simply because the sun has risen. Your mind, too, feels slow, as if it needs time to readjust to a world that is no longer defined by darkness and uncertainty. Yet despite all of this, there is a quiet sense of accomplishment, not in the usual sense of achieving something great, but in having endured something difficult. Stepping outside, the contrast is almost overwhelming. The openness of the space, the clarity of the light, the freshness of the air, all of it feels heightened after the confinement of the inn. You might find yourself pausing, taking a moment to fully experience this change, to let your senses adjust, to appreciate what was absent during the night. It is in this moment that the full weight of the experience becomes clear, not just as a memory, but as something that has left a tangible impact on how you feel. And as you prepare to move on, to continue your journey, there is an understanding that settles in quietly. The medieval inn was never meant to be a place of comfort in the way we think of it today. It was a necessity, a temporary shelter in a world where options were limited and risks were everywhere. Surviving a night within its walls was not about finding peace or rest, but about enduring conditions that tested both body and mind. You carry that understanding with you as you leave, along with the lingering sensations of the night, the sounds, the smells, the constant tension. It changes the way you think about safety, about comfort, about the simple act of resting without fear. And perhaps most importantly, it leaves you with a deeper appreciation for how much of what we consider normal today was once uncertain, fragile, and hard. Because in that long, uneasy night, survival was not something you could take for granted. It was something you had to hold on to, moment by moment, until the light finally returned. Even after stepping away from the inn, your body would continue to carry the memory of the night in subtle but persistent ways. The itch from insect bites would linger, small but constant reminders of how exposed you had been. Your clothes, now heavy with the smells of smoke and sweat, would cling to you in a way that made it impossible to forget where you had been. You might try to shake it off, to focus on the road ahead, but the experience does not fade easily. It stays with you, not just as a memory, but as a physical imprint that takes time to fully disappear. As you reflect on the night, you begin to realize that one of the most difficult aspects was not any single danger, but the accumulation of so many small, relentless discomforts. None of them alone might seem unbearable, but together they created an environment that constantly wore you down. It is this steady erosion of comfort, safety, and peace that makes the experience so difficult to endure. There is no moment of complete relief, no point at which you can fully relax and recover. Instead, it is a continuous test, one that demands patience and resilience from beginning to end. You also start to understand how different your expectations are from the reality of that world. In your time, a place to sleep is associated with rest, privacy, and security. It is a space where you can let go of your worries, even if only for a few hours. But in a medieval inn, those expectations do not apply. Sleep is uncertain, privacy is non-existent, and security is something you must actively maintain rather than passively receive. This mismatch between expectation and reality makes the experience even more challenging, because you are constantly reminded of what is missing. There is a deeper psychological effect as well, one that goes beyond the immediate discomfort. Spending a night in such an environment forces you to confront a level of vulnerability that is rarely experienced in modern life. You are reminded of how dependent you are on the systems and structures that provide safety and comfort in your everyday world. Without them, even the most basic aspects of living, eating, resting, staying safe become uncertain and difficult. It is a humbling realization, one that shifts your perspective in ways you might not have anticipated. As the day progresses and the distance between you and the inn grows, you may find yourself comparing everything around you to what you just experienced. The open air feels cleaner, the space feels safer, Even the simplest shelter along the road feels more comforting by comparison. You begin to appreciate things you might normally overlook. A quiet place to sit, a moment of stillness, the ability to rest without being watched or disturbed. These small comforts take on new meaning because you have just experienced their absence so intensely. And yet, there is also a lingering awareness that for the people of that time, this was not an extraordinary experience. It was simply part of life. They did not have the luxury of comparison, of knowing a more comfortable alternative. Their resilience was not a choice, but a necessity. They adapted because they had to, developing ways to cope with conditions that would feel overwhelming to someone unaccustomed to them. This realization adds another layer to your understanding. And even as the memory of that night begins to settle into something more distant, there remains a quiet realization that the hardest part was not what you saw, or even what you endured physically, but the constant awareness that nothing around you was truly reliable. In a modern setting, there is an invisible layer of trust that surrounds you. Trust in the structure of buildings, in the safety of food, in the predictability of the people around you. In the medieval inn, that layer simply does not exist. Every element is uncertain, and that uncertainty forces you to question everything, from the strength of the walls to the intentions of those sharing your space. During the night, you might have found yourself making small, careful decisions that you would never think about otherwise. Where to place your belongings so they remain within reach. How to position your body so you can wake quickly if needed. Whether to fully close your eyes or keep them slightly open, just enough to remain aware of your surroundings. These are not actions of comfort, but of survival. Subtle adjustments that reflect a constant effort to stay one step ahead of potential danger. There is also the realization that rest, something so basic and essential, becomes almost strategic in such an environment. You are not simply trying to sleep. You are trying to sleep in a way that does not compromise your safety. You might wake frequently, not because you want to, but because your mind refuses to let you drift too far. Each time you wake, there is a brief moment of confusion, followed by a quick scan of your surroundings, a silent check to ensure that everything is still as it should be. Only then do you allow yourself to close your eyes again, never fully surrendering to rest. As the night stretches on, the distinction between external discomfort and internal tension begins to blur. The physical environment affects your thoughts, and your thoughts, in turn, amplify your perception of the environment. A small noise feels louder because you are already on edge. A slight movement feels more significant because you are expecting something to happen. It becomes a cycle, where the conditions around you and your response to them feed into each other, making the experience feel more intense with each passing hour. You may also notice how little control you have over your immediate surroundings. In your own space, you can adjust the temperature, control the lighting, choose when to sleep and when to wake. In the inn, all of these factors are beyond your control. The fire burns as it will. The noise rises and falls unpredictably. The presence of others shapes the environment in ways you cannot influence. This lack of control adds to the sense of unease, reminding you that you are not the master of your environment, but merely a participant within it. At times, you might try to distract yourself, to focus on something other than the discomfort and tension. Perhaps you count your breaths, or listen to the patterns of sound around you, trying to find some rhythm that you can follow. These small mental strategies offer brief moments of relief, but they are temporary, easily disrupted by a sudden noise or movement. Still, they highlight an important aspect of survival in such conditions, the ability to adapt, not just physically, but mentally. As the final moments of night give way to the first signs of morning, there is a subtle but powerful shift within you. It is not just relief that the night is ending, but a release of the tension that has been building for hours. Your body begins to relax, almost without you realizing it, as the need for constant vigilance fades. Your thoughts become clearer, less reactive, more grounded. The environment has not changed dramatically, but your perception of it has influenced by the return of light and the knowledge that the most uncertain part of the experience is over. Yet, even in that moment of relief, there is a lingering awareness of how close everything felt, how thin the line was between endurance and vulnerability. You understand now that surviving the night was not guaranteed, that it depended on a combination of awareness, restraint, and a certain amount of luck. It was not something you could fully control, no matter how careful you were. When you finally move away from the inn, putting distance between yourself and that confined, restless space, you carry with you more than just fatigue. You carry a heightened sense of awareness, a deeper understanding of what it means to exist without the safeguards you are used to. The experience changes how you think about safety, about comfort, about the simple act of closing your eyes and trusting that nothing will go wrong. And perhaps the most lasting impression is this: that in a world without modern protections, survival was not a background condition, something assumed and rarely questioned. It was an active process, something that required attention, effort, and resilience at every moment. Even in a place meant for rest, that process never stopped. So when you imagine yourself in that medieval inn, lying awake in the dim light, surrounded by strangers and uncertainty, it becomes clear why surviving a single night would be such a challenge. Not because of one overwhelming threat, but because of the constant, unrelenting presence of many smaller ones, each demanding your awareness, each testing your ability to endure. And in that long, uneasy stretch between dusk and dawn, survival is not something you achieve all at once, but something you maintain, moment by moment, until the light finally returns. As the experience sinks deeper into your memory, you begin to realize that what made the night truly difficult was the way it stripped away every illusion of ease. In your normal life, comfort is so constant that you barely notice it, a quiet background presence that allows you to focus on other things. But in that medieval inn, comfort is not just absent. It is replaced by a constant negotiation with your surroundings. Every moment requires a small adjustment, a decision, a reaction. You are never simply existing. You are continuously responding. There is a point, somewhere in the later hours of the night, where your mind begins to wander in unusual ways. Not freely, as it might when you are relaxed, but in short, fragmented thoughts that drift between awareness and fatigue. You might find yourself replaying small details over and over: the sound of footsteps, the flicker of firelight, the expression on someone's face earlier in the evening. These thoughts do not form a clear narrative, but they reflect the way your mind is trying to process an environment that feels both overwhelming and unpredictable. You also begin to understand how much of your sense of safety depends on predictability. In a familiar place, you know what to expect. You recognize the sounds, understand the layout, trust the structure in the inn. Nothing is familiar. Every sound is new, every movement uncertain, every shadow ambiguous. This lack of predictability keeps your mind active, constantly analyzing, constantly preparing for possibilities that may never come. It is mentally exhausting in a way that is difficult to describe until you experience it. Your awareness of other people becomes sharper, more instinctive. You notice how they move, how they speak, how they position themselves in the space. You might find yourself trying to read their intentions from small cues, a glance, a gesture, the tone of their voice. It is not a conscious effort, but a natural response to being in a situation where understanding others could mean the difference between safety and risk. And yet, despite this heightened awareness, certainty remains out of reach. You can observe, you can guess, but you cannot truly know. There is also a subtle but persistent feeling of confinement, not just physical, but psychological. The walls of the inn are not thick or secure enough to feel protective, yet they are close enough to limit your movement, to remind you that you are contained within a space you cannot easily leave. This creates a tension between wanting to escape and knowing that staying is the safer option. It is a paradox that adds to the overall strain of the experience. At times you may become acutely aware of your own presence within the space, of how your movements, your breathing, even the sound of your clothes might be noticed by others. This awareness can make you more cautious, more deliberate, as you try to avoid drawing attention to yourself. You become quieter, more still, blending into the environment as much as possible. It is another small adaptation, another way of reducing risk in a place where standing out could be dangerous. As the night nears its end, there is a gradual shift, not just in the environment, but in your own mindset. The constant tension begins to loosen, replaced by a cautious sense of anticipation. You start to believe that you will make it through, that the night will end without incident. This belief does not remove the discomfort, but it changes how you perceive it. What once felt endless now feels temporary, something that can be endured because you know it is close to being over. When the first true light of morning enters the space, it feels almost transformative. The same room that felt oppressive and uncertain in the darkness now appears more ordinary, less threatening. The people around you, once potential risks, now seem simply tired, focused on their own routines. The shift is not just in the environment, but in your perception of it, shaped by the return of visibility and the reduction of uncertainty. And yet, even in this calmer state, you cannot completely forget what the night was like. The memory of that tension, that constant awareness, lingers just beneath the surface. It changes the way you interpret the space, even in daylight. As the memory stretches further, you begin to realize that one of the most unsettling aspects of the night was how little separation there was between you and everything else happening around you. In your world, there are layers, walls, doors, personal space, all designed to create boundaries that protect you both physically and psychologically. In the medieval inn, those boundaries are thin or non-existent. You are not just near other people, you are entangled in their presence, their movements, their sounds, their very existence blending into your own experience, whether you want it or not. At some point during the night, you may have noticed how even your breathing felt out of place, as though it was something you had to control. Too loud, and it might draw attention. Too shallow, and it might make you more anxious. It is a strange kind of awareness, being conscious of something so automatic, but it reflects how deeply the environment influences your behavior. You are constantly adjusting, constantly trying to remain unnoticed, as if invisibility itself were a form of safety. The longer you remain in that space, the more your sense of normal begins to shift. What initially felt unbearable starts to become something you simply tolerate. The noise no longer surprises you in the same way. The smell becomes less shocking, the discomfort more familiar. This is not because the conditions have improved, but because your mind is adapting, lowering its expectations, accepting what it cannot change. It is a subtle transformation, but an important one, showing how quickly humans can adjust even to difficult circumstances when there is no alternative. And yet, even as you adapt, there is a part of you that resists, that refuses to fully accept the situation as normal. This tension between adaptation and resistance creates a kind of internal conflict. You want to relax, to let go, but you cannot fully trust the environment enough to do so. So you exist in a middle state, neither fully at ease nor completely overwhelmed, constantly balancing between the two. There are moments when you might catch a glimpse of someone else in a similar state. Their eyes open in the dim light, their posture tense, their attention focused on the same uncertain surroundings. In those brief exchanges, there is a silent understanding, a recognition that you are both experiencing the same unease. But it is not a connection that leads to comfort. Instead, it reinforces the reality of the situation, reminding you that this is not an individual reaction, but a shared condition. The passage of the night begins to feel less like a sequence of hours and more like a continuous stretch of endurance. Without clear breaks or moments of relief, time loses its usual structure. You are not moving from one phase to another. You are simply remaining, holding on, waiting for something to change. This waiting becomes its own challenge, requiring patience and mental strength to sustain. As fatigue deepens, your thoughts may become simpler, more focused on immediate sensations. You notice the pressure of the surface beneath you, the texture of the air, the rhythm of your own heartbeat. These sensations become more prominent, as if your mind is narrowing its focus to cope with the overwhelming nature of the environment. It is a kind of grounding, but not a comfortable one, more like a way of managing the constant input without becoming completely overwhelmed. There is also a growing awareness of how fragile your situation is. A single event, a sudden argument, an unexpected disturbance could change everything. This awareness keeps you alert, even as your body longs for rest. It is not just about what is happening, but about what could happen, the possibilities that exist just beyond your control. This anticipation is exhausting in its own way, adding another layer to the overall strain of the experience. As the first signs of morning approach, there is a gradual shift, not only in the light, but in the energy of the space. The tension that has been building throughout the night begins to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of movement. People begin to prepare themselves, to gather their belongings, to transition out of the shared stillness of the night. This change is subtle, but it carries a sense of direction, a movement toward something different. When you finally step away from the inn, there is a moment of contrast so sharp that it almost feels unreal. The open space, the natural light, the relative quiet, all of it feels amplified after the confinement of the night. You might find yourself pausing, not just to rest, but to recalibrate, to allow your mind and body to adjust to a different kind of environment. And in that moment, there is a deeper understanding that settles in, one that goes beyond the immediate experience. You realize that surviving a night in a medieval inn is not just about enduring discomfort or avoiding danger. It is about navigating a world where certainty is rare, where control is limited, and where every aspect of your environment demands attention. It is about learning, even if only briefly, what it means to exist without the protections you are used to, and how much effort it takes to maintain even a basic sense of safety. The experience leaves you with a heightened appreciation for the structures and systems that define your own time, the things that make rest possible, that allow you to feel secure without constant vigilance. It also leaves you with a respect for those who lived in that world, who faced these conditions not as a single experience, but as a regular part of life. Because in the end, what makes that night so difficult is not just the physical conditions or the potential dangers, but the way it forces you to confront a different version of reality, one where survival is active, immediate, and never guaranteed. And as you move forward, leaving that place behind, you carry with you the understanding that even a single night in such a world is enough to change the way you think about comfort, safety, and what it truly means to rest. As the experience settles even deeper in your mind, you begin to recognize something even more subtle, the way the night quietly reshaped your instincts without you fully realizing it in the moment. By the time the darkest hours had passed, you were no longer reacting the way you would in a familiar environment. Your movements had become slower, more deliberate. Your attention had narrowed to what mattered most. You were no longer thinking about comfort at all, only about maintaining a fragile sense of safety in a place that never truly offered it. There is a moment, often unnoticed at first, when you realize how alert your body has remained for hours. Your shoulders are slightly tense, your breathing measured, your ears tuned to every shift in sound. Even when nothing is happening, your body behaves as if something might. It is not panic, but a sustained readiness, the kind that quietly drains your energy over time. You are not just awake, you are on guard, and that difference is what makes the experience so exhausting. You might also begin to notice how your perception of other people has changed throughout the night. Earlier they were strangers, undefined and unpredictable. As time passed, you started to categorize them instinctively, not by who they are, but by how they behave. The one who moves frequently becomes someone to watch. The one who sleeps heavily becomes less of a concern. The one who speaks in hushed tones with others becomes a question in your mind. These silent observations are not judgments in the usual sense, but survival assessments, ways of understanding your surroundings without direct interaction. At the same time, you become aware of how exposed you truly are, not just physically, but in terms of your presence. There is nowhere to withdraw, nowhere to disappear completely. Even in stillness, you exist within the awareness of others, just as they exist within yours. This shared exposure creates a kind of tension that never fully fades, even in the quietest moments. You are part of the environment, and the environment is constantly pressing back against you. As the hours continue, your sense of identity within that space begins to simplify. You are no longer thinking about who you are outside of it. Your goals, your plans, your broader life. Those thoughts feel distant, almost irrelevant. In their place is a more immediate awareness. You are a person trying to get through the night. It is a reduction of complexity, a narrowing of focus that reflects the demands of the situation. Everything unnecessary falls away, leaving only what is essential. There is also a growing awareness of how fragile comfort truly is. The smallest change can disrupt it. A louder voice, a sudden movement, a shift in temperature. Nothing is stable enough to rely on, and so you stop expecting stability altogether. Instead, you adjust continuously, accepting that the environment will change and that you must change with it. This constant adaptation becomes almost automatic, a quiet skill that develops over the course of the night. At certain points, you may feel a brief sense of calm, a moment where the sounds soften, where your body relaxes just slightly. But these moments are fleeting, easily broken by the next disturbance. They serve as reminders of what rest could feel like, but also of how difficult it is to maintain in such conditions. Each interruption pulls you back into awareness, reinforcing the idea that true rest is out of reach. As the first real signs of morning approach, there is a shift not just in light, but in your internal state. The tension that has been sustained for so long begins to release in small, gradual ways. Your breathing deepens, your muscles loosen, your thoughts become less reactive. It is not an immediate transformation, but a slow return. And even after all of this, there is still one more layer to the experience that becomes clear only when you try to imagine enduring it not just once, but again and again. A single night feels like a test, something you can push through because you know it will end. But in the medieval world, this was not a rare ordeal. For many, it was routine. That realization changes everything, because it forces you to consider not just survival for one night, but the ability to repeatedly face the same conditions without losing your strength, your awareness, or your sense of self. If you were to return to that inn on another night, you might think it would be easier, that familiarity would reduce the tension. In some ways it might. You would know what to expect, understand the rhythms of the place, anticipate the discomforts. But in other ways, it could feel even heavier, because the knowledge of what lies ahead removes any illusion of relief. You are no longer reacting to the unknown, you are bracing for something you already understand to be difficult. There is also the question of how long your body and mind could sustain such a pattern. Constant exposure to poor rest, unhygienic conditions, and low-level stress would begin to weigh you down over time. Your reactions might slow, your judgment might weaken, your resilience might fade. In a world where survival depends on awareness and quick thinking, even a small decline in these abilities could have serious consequences. The inn, in this sense, is not just a place where danger exists in the moment, but a place that gradually reduces your capacity to deal with danger in the future. You begin to understand that survival is not just about enduring what happens during the night, but about preserving enough of yourself to continue beyond it. It is about managing your energy, your focus, your health, even when the environment works against you. This adds another layer of complexity to the experience, because it is no longer just about getting through the night, but about doing so in a way that does not leave you too weakened to face what comes next. There is also something deeply human in the way people around you cope with these conditions. You might notice small habits, routines that seem insignificant but serve a purpose. Someone wraps themselves tightly in whatever cloth they have, creating a small sense of personal space. Another keeps a hand on their belongings even while resting, maintaining a connection that offers some reassurance. Someone else positions themselves near a wall or corner, reducing the number of directions from which they might be approached. These are not formal strategies, but they reflect an intuitive understanding of how to navigate the environment. At the same time, there is a quiet acceptance that runs through the space. Not resignation, but a kind of practical acknowledgement that this is how things are. People do not expect the inn to be comfortable or safe in the way you might. Their expectations are different, shaped by experience. This difference in expectation is part of what allows them to endure. They are not constantly comparing the reality to something better. They are working within what is available. For you, however, that comparison remains. You cannot help but think about how different things could be, how much easier it would be, with even small improvements. A cleaner space, a secure door, a quiet room. This awareness makes the experience feel more intense, because you are constantly aware of what is missing. It is not just discomfort, it is the contrast between what is and what could be. As the night finally gives way to day once more, and you find yourself stepping out into the light again, there is a sense that you have not just passed through a difficult experience, but gained a deeper understanding of what survival truly meant in that time. It was not defined by dramatic moments of danger alone, but by the ability to endure a constant background of discomfort, uncertainty, and vulnerability. And perhaps the most striking realization is how much of modern life is built to remove exactly these kinds of challenges. The things you rarely think about, a clean bed, a locked door, a quiet space, are not small conveniences. They are the result of generations of effort to create environments where rest is possible, where safety can be assumed rather than constantly defended. So when you imagine yourself once more in that medieval inn, lying awake as the night stretches on, you understand that survival is not a single act or decision. It is a continuous process, shaped by awareness, adaptation, and endurance. It is the ability to remain present in an environment that offers little comfort and no guarantees, to hold on through the long, uneasy hours until the light finally returns. And in that understanding, there is a quiet respect for those who lived in that world, who faced these conditions not as an exception, but as part of their daily reality, because surviving one night is difficult, surviving many without losing the ability to continue forward is something else entirely. And when you push the imagination even further, past the physical strain and the mental tension, you begin to notice something almost unsettling in how the night reshapes your sense of what is enough. At the beginning, you might have hoped for a decent place to lie down, a quiet corner, a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. But as the hours pass, those expectations quietly collapse. Enough becomes much smaller, much simpler. A few minutes without disturbance feels like relief. A moment where no one is moving nearby feels like safety. The absence of a new problem begins to feel like comfort. This shift is subtle, but it reveals something important about survival in that environment. It is not about achieving comfort, but about lowering the threshold of what you consider acceptable. You are not gaining anything. You are adjusting to the lack of it, and while that adjustment helps you endure the night, it also shows how easily your standards can change when you are placed in a situation where you have no control. There is also a strange awareness of how exposed time itself feels. In a modern space, time often passes unnoticed, filled with distractions or structured by routine. In the inn, time feels raw. You feel each passing moment more directly, more slowly, as if nothing is buffering your experience. There is no escape into silence, no true distraction, no sense of flow. You are simply there, present in every second, aware of the environment and your place within it. It is an intensity that is difficult to sustain, and yet there is no alternative. At certain points, you might find yourself listening not just to the sounds around you, but to the patterns within them. The repetition of someone's breathing, the occasional shifting of wood, the distant movement of animals outside. These patterns become anchors, small points of consistency in an otherwise unpredictable environment. You hold on to them, not because they are comforting in themselves, but because they offer something stable, something you can anticipate. And yet, even these small anchors are fragile. A sudden interruption breaks the pattern, and with it, the small sense of stability you had built. You are reminded again that nothing here is reliable for long, that every sense of calm is temporary. This constant cycle of brief adjustment and sudden disruption is what makes the experience so draining. You are not just enduring discomfort. You are continuously rebuilding your sense of balance, only to have it unsettled again. There is also a growing awareness of how little space there is between you and the unknown. In a more secure environment, there are layers that separate you from potential threats, walls, locks, distance in the inn. Those layers are thin or absent. The unknown is not far away, it is right beside you. In the next movement, the next sound, the next person. This proximity makes everything feel more immediate, more personal, as if you are always just one step away from something changing. As the final stretch of night approaches, your thoughts may become quieter, not because you are at peace, but because you are simply too tired to maintain the same level of internal activity. It is a kind of mental dimming where your mind conserves energy in the same way your body does. You become more focused on the present moment, less concerned with anything beyond it. It is not calm in the usual sense, but it is a form of stillness, one that comes from reaching the limits of what you can process. When the first true light begins to enter the space, it does more than just reveal what was hidden. It changes the entire atmosphere, not instantly, but steadily. The same sounds that felt threatening in the dark now feel ordinary. The same people who seemed unpredictable now appear simply tired like you. The environment itself has not changed dramatically, but your perception of it has shifted, shaped by the presence of light and the fading of uncertainty. And in that moment, you realize something that was not clear before. Much of what made the night so difficult was not just the physical conditions, but the combination of those conditions with darkness, with the inability to see clearly, to understand fully, to predict with confidence. The return of light does not remove the discomfort, but it restores a sense of orientation, a feeling that you can once again understand your surroundings. As you leave, there is a final layer of understanding that settles in quietly. Surviving that night was not about overcoming a single challenge, but about navigating a constant state of partial awareness, never fully at ease, never fully in danger, but always somewhere in between. It is this in-between state that is the most difficult to endure because it offers no clear resolution. And when you reflect on it even longer, there is one final realization that quietly settles in. Something deeper than discomfort, deeper than fear. It is the understanding that in that medieval inn you were never truly at rest, not even for a single moment. Your body may have been still at times, your eyes may have closed briefly, but true rest, the kind where your mind lets go completely, never actually happened. You were always holding on to something, awareness, caution, readiness, and that constant holding, that inability to fully release control, is what makes the experience so fundamentally exhausting. In your normal life, rest is not just physical, it is mental. It is the ability to trust your surroundings enough to let your guard down, to allow yourself to drift without thinking about what might happen next. But in that inn, that trust never forms. Even in the quietest moments, there is a part of you that remains awake, listening, watching, waiting. It is like trying to sleep while standing on uncertain ground, where any shift could require immediate reaction. There is also a strange awareness of how the night compresses your world. Everything outside the inn fades away. Your plans, your identity, your future, all of it becomes distant, almost irrelevant. The entire world shrinks to that one room, that one stretch of time, that one goal: get through the night. It is an intense narrowing of experience, where nothing exists beyond what you can hear, feel, and sense in that moment. At some point, you may even stop resisting the discomfort in the same way. Not because it has lessened, but because you no longer have the energy to push against it. You begin to accept it in a quiet, passive way, allowing it to exist without constantly reacting to it. This is not comfort, but a form of endurance, a way of conserving what little energy you have left. It is the body and mind adapting to a situation they cannot change, choosing survival over resistance. And yet, even in that state, there is a thread of awareness that never breaks. You are never completely unaware, never fully detached. It is a delicate balance, letting go just enough to endure, but not enough to become vulnerable. Maintaining that balance over hours, without rest, without certainty, is what makes the experience so taxing in a way that is difficult to fully explain. As the final darkness begins to lift, there is a quiet shift not just in the room, but within you. It is not relief in the usual sense, not a sudden release, but a gradual easing. Your mind begins to trust the environment a little more. Your body begins to loosen its constant tension. It happens slowly, almost cautiously, as if you are testing whether it is safe to relax again. When the light finally fills the space, there is a moment of clarity that feels almost overwhelming. The same room that felt so uncertain now appears simple, almost ordinary. The same people who seemed unpredictable now seem like individuals, each carrying their own fatigue, their own quiet relief at having made it through. The transformation is not in the place itself, but in your perception of it, shaped entirely by the return of visibility and the reduction of uncertainty. And as you step outside, fully leaving that environment behind, there is one last thought that lingers. It is not just that the night was difficult, but that it required something from you, something constant and sustained. It required your attention, your awareness, your ability to endure without certainty. It was not a challenge you could solve or overcome in a single moment. It was something you had to live through, second by second, without knowing exactly how it would unfold. That is why surviving a night in a medieval inn feels so different from other kinds of hardship. It is not defined by a peak moment of danger or a clear turning point. It is defined by duration, by the slow passage of time under conditions that never allow you to fully rest. It is a test of persistence more than anything else. A quiet, relentless demand that you remain present and aware until the very end. And when you finally move on, carrying the weight of that experience with you, you understand something that was not obvious before. Survival is not always about strength in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it is about the ability to remain steady in an environment that never settles, to continue forward even when there is no clear moment of relief, to endure not just what happens, but the uncertainty of what might happen next. Because in that long, dimly lit room, surrounded by strangers and shifting shadows, survival was not a single act. It was a continuous state, held together by your awareness, your restraint, and your quiet determination to make it through, until the light finally returned and gave you permission to let go. And even after all of that, there is still one last, almost invisible layer to the experience. Something you only begin to notice when everything is finally over. It is the way the night changes your relationship with silence itself. In your normal world, silence is calming, a sign that everything is still, safe, undisturbed. But in that medieval inn, silence never truly felt peaceful. It felt uncertain, as if something could break it at any moment. So even when the noise faded, your mind did not interpret it as safety. It treated it as a pause, a temporary gap before the next disturbance. This changes how you experience stillness. You no longer relax into it. Instead, you listen more closely, almost expecting it to end. Your awareness sharpens in those quiet moments, scanning for anything that might disrupt them. It is a subtle shift, but it shows how deeply the environment has influenced your instincts. Even the absence of sound becomes something you cannot fully trust. There is also a lingering sense that the night never offered you a clear boundary between safe and unsafe. In most situations, you can identify when you are in danger and when you are not. There are signals, clear indicators that allow you to adjust your behavior. But in the inn, those signals are blurred. Nothing is obviously safe, but nothing is immediately dangerous either. You exist in a constant middle ground where every moment requires attention. But no moment provides certainty. That middle ground is what makes the experience so mentally exhausting. It forces you to maintain a level of awareness that has no clear end point. You cannot relax because you are not sure it is safe to do so, But you cannot remain fully alert forever without feeling drained. So you exist in that in-between state, balancing caution and fatigue, never fully settling into either. At some point, you may also realize how much you have relied on small, almost invisible habits to get through the night. The way you positioned your body, the way you kept your belongings close, the way you responded to certain sounds more quickly than others. These habits formed naturally, without conscious planning, shaped entirely by the environment. They are evidence of how adaptable the human mind is, how quickly it learns to navigate even unfamiliar and uncomfortable situations. And yet, there is a cost to that adaptability. It requires energy, focus, and constant engagement. It is not something you can sustain indefinitely without feeling the effects. By the time the night ends, you are not just tired, you are depleted in a way that goes beyond physical fatigue. Your mind has been working continuously, processing, adjusting, anticipating, and that effort leaves its mark. When you finally leave the inn and step into the morning, there is a sense that something within you is slowly recalibrating. The open space, the light, the distance from others, all of it allows your awareness to expand again, to move beyond the narrow focus that defined the night. You begin to think about things outside of immediate survival, to reconnect with a broader sense of time and purpose. But even as that shift happens, the memory of the night remains sharp in certain ways. Not just the obvious discomforts, but the feeling of being constantly aware, constantly adjusting, constantly present, in a way that left no room for true rest. It is a memory that stays with you, not because of a single event, but because of how sustained and unbroken the experience was. And that is perhaps the final understanding you carry with you. That surviving a night in a medieval inn was not about facing one great danger or overcoming a single obstacle. It was about enduring a continuous state of uncertainty, where every small factor contributed to an environment that never allowed you to fully relax. It was about maintaining your awareness over time, even as your energy faded, even as your desire for rest grew stronger. It shows you that survival, in that context, was not dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, steady, and persistent. It was the ability to remain present in a space that demanded your attention without ever offering reassurance. It was the strength to continue, not in bursts, but in a sustained, unbroken way, until the night finally ended. And as you move further away from that experience, returning to a world where rest is easier and safety more certain, you understand just how much of a difference those things make. Because once you have spent even a single night in a place where they are absent, you begin to see them not as ordinary, but as something deeply valuable, something that transforms survival from a constant effort into something almost effortless. And that is why when you imagine yourself there again, in that dim, crowded space, surrounded by uncertainty and unable to fully let go, it becomes clear that surviving such a night is not just difficult. It is a quiet test of endurance, one that challenges you not through intensity, but through persistence, asking you to hold on moment by moment. And even beyond all of that, there is one final, almost lingering sensation that stays with you long after the night has ended. The feeling that your awareness had nowhere to rest. Not your body, not your thoughts, but your awareness itself. In a comfortable place, your attention can drift. It can wander, soften, disappear into sleep without resistance. But in that medieval inn, your awareness had to remain anchored, fixed to the present moment, because letting it drift felt like a risk you could not afford. You begin to understand that this is what truly defined the experience. Not just discomfort, not just uncertainty, but the inability to mentally step away, even for a short time. Every sound demanded interpretation. Every movement required acknowledgement. Every shift in the environment pulled your attention back, preventing you from ever fully disconnecting. It is this constant engagement, this refusal of the environment to let you switch off, that makes the night feel so long and so draining. There is also a subtle realization about how fragile your sense of control really is. At the beginning of the night, you may have believed you could manage the situation, choose where to sit, how to rest, how to stay safe. But as time passed, it became clear that control was limited, that the environment dictated far more than you did. You were adapting. Yes, but always in response, never fully in command. That shift, from feeling in control to recognizing your dependence on circumstances, adds another layer to the experience. At certain moments, you may have caught yourself hoping for something very simple, not comfort, not luxury, but just consistency. A stretch of time where nothing changes, where the environment holds steady long enough for your body and mind to settle. But that consistency never truly arrives. The inn is a place of constant motion, constant variation, where even small changes ripple through the space and affect everyone within it. This lack of stability makes it difficult to form any sense of rhythm. In a normal night, your body follows a pattern, gradually relaxing, entering deeper stages of rest, recovering as time passes. In the inn, that pattern is broken. You move in and out of shallow rest, never reaching the deeper levels your body needs. The night becomes fragmented, not a continuous experience, but a series of interruptions strung together. And yet, despite all of this, there is a quiet persistence within you that keeps you going. You do not collapse. You do not lose awareness entirely. You continue, moment by moment, adjusting, enduring, holding on. It is not dramatic or visible, but it is constant. It is the part of you that refuses to give in, that maintains just enough clarity to navigate the environment, even when everything feels uncertain. As the final moments before dawn arrive, there is a subtle shift in how you perceive time itself. What once felt slow and heavy begins to feel lighter, as if the end is finally within reach. The same environment that felt endless now feels finite, something that can be completed rather than endured indefinitely. This change is not in the environment, but in your perception of it, shaped by the knowledge that the night is nearly over. When the light finally fills the space, there is a release that is both physical and mental. Your body relaxes, your thoughts expand, your awareness no longer needs to remain so tightly focused. It is not just relief from discomfort, but relief from the constant demand for attention, the need to remain present in a way that never allowed you to fully rest. And as you step away from the inn, leaving behind the sounds, the smells, the tension, there is one final understanding that settles quietly within you. that surviving that night was not about strength in the usual sense. It was about continuity, about maintaining your awareness, your caution, your presence over a long, uninterrupted stretch of time without certainty, without comfort, without true rest. It teaches you that survival in that world was not defined by moments of action, but by sustained endurance, by the ability to remain steady in an environment that never settled, to continue forward even when there was no clear sign of relief, to hold on to awareness until the moment it was finally safe to let go. And that is why, when you imagine yourself there once more, lying awake in that dim, crowded inn, surrounded by shifting shadows and unfamiliar sounds, it becomes clear that the real challenge was never just making it through the night. It was maintaining yourself within it, holding on to your clarity, your caution, your resilience, until the darkness finally lifted and gave you back the one thing the night had taken from you, the ability to truly rest. And even after reaching that point of understanding, there is still one final, almost haunting detail that lingers in your mind, the realization that the night never truly belonged to you. In your own time, the night is something you control. You decide when to sleep, how to sleep, and under what conditions. It is your space, your time to recover. But in that medieval inn, the night feels shared, unpredictable, almost taken out of your hands. You are not experiencing it on your own terms. You are enduring it alongside forces you cannot fully influence. This loss of ownership over something as basic as your own rest creates a subtle but powerful unease. You are not just uncomfortable, you are displaced from your sense of control. Even your attempt to rest becomes something negotiated with the environment, shaped by noise, by movement, by the presence of others. You are constantly adjusting to a rhythm that is not yours. At certain moments, you may have felt the urge to fully withdraw, to close your eyes and ignore everything around you, to trust that nothing would go wrong. But that urge is always held back by something deeper, an instinct that tells you it is not safe to disconnect completely. So you exist in a state of partial engagement, never fully absent. It is a delicate and exhausting balance, one that requires constant maintenance. There is also a quiet realization about how little privacy shapes your sense of self. In a modern environment, privacy allows you to relax, to exist without being observed or interrupted. In the inn, that privacy is gone. Every movement, every shift, every sound you make is part of a shared space. You are aware that others can notice you, just as you notice them. This awareness changes how you behave, making you more restrained, more cautious, more contained. Over time, this lack of privacy begins to feel almost as heavy as the physical discomfort. It is not just that you cannot rest properly, it is that you cannot fully be yourself in that space. You are always slightly guarded, slightly aware, slightly removed from the kind of ease that comes with being alone or among people you trust. As the night stretches toward its end, there is a growing sense that you are holding on to something invisible. Not an object, not a place, but a state of mind. You are holding on to your composure, your awareness, your ability to remain steady despite everything around you. It is not something you can see or measure, but you can feel the effort it requires, the way it draws on your energy over time. And when the first light finally arrives, It does more than illuminate the room. It gives that effort a kind of closure. It tells your body and mind that it is no longer necessary to hold on in the same way. The constant vigilance begins to fade, the need for caution begins to ease, and you are finally allowed to release what you have been carrying through the night. Stepping outside, the difference feels almost unreal. The openness of the space, the clarity of the light, the distance from others, it all creates a sense of freedom that you did not fully realize you were missing. Your awareness expands outward again, no longer confined to the immediate, no longer focused solely on survival, and yet even as you move forward, there is a quiet respect that remains for what you endured, not because it was dramatic or extreme in any obvious way, but because of how steady and unrelenting it was. It demanded something from you continuously, without pause, without clear resolution. That is what makes surviving a night in a medieval inn so different from other challenges. It is not defined by intensity, but by persistence. It is not about a single moment of danger, but about a sustained environment where discomfort, uncertainty, and vigilance are always present, always requiring your attention. And in that understanding, there is a final clarity that settles in survival. In that world was not something that happened once and was done. It was something you maintained quietly, steadily, moment by moment, through conditions that never fully allowed you to relax. It was not about overcoming the night, but about staying intact within it. So when you imagine yourself there one last time, lying in that dim, crowded space, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and shifting shadows, you understand that the real challenge was not simply getting through until morning. It was preserving your awareness, your caution, your sense of self, until the light returned and gave you back the control that the night had taken away.